When I first saw Pathfinder Kingmaker, I was excited. A Kickstarter campaign that looks like a classic RPG, something like Baldur's Gate, and based on Dungeons & Dragons, the role-playing tabletop game. On the face of it, this game looked like it was going to be one of my favourite games of all time, but sadly, there were some issues I had with it. I'm Roy McCoy, and this is my 5-step in-depth review of Pathfinder Kingmaker Enhanced Edition that hits the PlayStation 4 on the 18th of August 2020. If this is your first time to my channel, it's an RPG focused channel, and I release new content every Tuesday and Wednesday and a news summary on Saturday. I like my reviews of new games and classic games from my archives to be in-depth reviews that you can trust. If it is your first time here, don't forget to give me a like because it really helps my channel grow. So let's talk about the 5 steps in this review. Step 1, we're going to be summarising what this game is in a nutshell. Step 2, we'll be talking about the story. Step 3, let's have a look at the game mechanics. Step 4, it's time to look at the audio and the graphics. And step 5 is the total summary of this game, whether you should buy it, and giving you a quick summary of the positives and negatives. So, without further ado, let's look at Pathfinder Kingmaker. So, what is it in a nutshell? Well, as I mentioned in my introduction, this is a classical looking RPG. If you've played something like Baldur's Gate, you'll be right at home with the graphical style and a lot of the interfaces. It's based on the Pathfinder Dungeons & Dragons game, so it's heavily rooted in the tabletop experience. The developers have quite clearly tried to base their game and keep their game as loyal as they possibly can to the tabletop experience. And that includes dice rolls, a lot of the lore, the characters. The basic feel of the game is like a Dungeons & Dragons experience, and it is a phenomenal experience, something that I really loved. And I have to say that really needs to be applauded. So if you do enjoy your top-down isometric Baldur's Gate style RPGs that really do take themselves seriously with a lot of lore and a lot of time spent getting into them, then this is definitely a game you should look at. That said, it isn't the easiest game to love. It isn't love at first sight, and you will spend a considerable amount of your time, especially early on, watching YouTube videos and reading web pages trying to understand the full extent of the game. Another point to mention at this time is that this game was designed for PC, and it feels very much like that. I will talk about that in the game mechanics part. So with that brief summary over, let's move on to the story. Now, one thing that I really loved about this game was the story. The story doesn't do anything really that's original or shocking, but it's a solid narrative that's well told. You start off basically as a level 1 adventurer, and you rise up to become like a kind of lord of your own area, your own kingdom. One of the best parts of the game for me was the characterization of the people that you meet and the characters that you meet. Of course, this is your standard kind of classic RPG where there is an overriding through narrative that you follow, the story that you follow, this rise to greatness, but lots of great side quests as well. One thing about the story that I do need to mention is it doesn't really do anything new, with the only real new and interesting thing, a bit that comes a little later on, which is when you get your own kingdom, and then it becomes kind of a kingdom management section. It's okay, it's good fun, and it is something new, but on the whole, this is a classic story. So if you're looking for something innovative and creative, I'm not going to mention too much about the story, even though I have to say I don't think it's the greatest and biggest selling point of this game. But if you are looking for that new innovation, the original story, then maybe this is not the one for you. The main section of this review will have to be in the next section, which is the game mechanics. Now, there was a lot that I loved about this game, and there was a lot that I did not like. And this is where I'm going to summarise. Let's talk about first about the things that I did like. I enjoyed the overall look and feel of the game. It did feel like something out of Baldur's Gate era. Sadly though, it doesn't hold a part of Baldur's Gate. The story was better in Baldur's Gate, the overall gameplay was better. The game mechanic flaws for me are the things that I really need to highlight. Now, there were some obvious issues like freezing, and I had a problem with the save games. One time my save game just completely corrupted and I couldn't reopen it, so I had to start the game again, which was really frustrating. I think that was a one-off, but because it happened to me, I need to mention it. Another issue was when there were too many enemies on the screen, the game just froze and I would need to reboot it. That for me was really frustrating. One thing that I really enjoyed was the combat. Now, you had 2 options for combat. You could make it turn-based or you could make it real-time with a pause facility, which was very much similar to Baldur's Gate. I didn't really care much for the pause facility. I don't think it worked overly well on the PlayStation, but the actual turn-based combat made the game feel much more interactive and engaging, ironically enough. The levels of customization of your character and also the upgrading system were phenomenal, and it really did feel like I was involved in a D&D session. Another thing that I really enjoyed was the combat roles. Now, I mentioned that the game is nothing new in terms of story, but the real selling point of this game is that it does feel like a D&D experience, so this dice rolling is heavily involved. So there is quite a lot of RNG and random elements to this game. That said, the dice rollers, I think, should never go to Las Vegas because it seemed overly that I was missing hits and failing my rolls. Now, maybe that's just bad luck, but sadly, it hampered my experience of the game. Now, there were certain difficulty levels. I put it on normal. I actually ended up putting it on easy to try and make it a bit more fun, but I just seemed to lose too many times. Now, another thing that needs to be celebrated about mechanics is that at a relatively low level, you can stumble across a difficult area, and you have to kind of level up and come back later on. And I enjoyed that because it shows a progression in the game. Leveling up also seems to be really rewarding rather than just kind of a part of the game. It seems like an absolute focus of the developers to feel the rewarding system of you leveling up and becoming more and more powerful. Now for my biggest gripe of the game. I had no idea what I was doing at times. The game did not seem to inform me on certain things. Now, there was a tutorial of sorts, but it seemed overly complicated and overly confusing. And I found myself being lost, and like I said before, reading websites and watching videos to work it out. Let me give you an example. Earlier on, I discovered a spider swarm. Now, a spider swarm, it tells you, and it does give you a little hint, that you need flame magic or acid magic or even a torch. But at that time, only one of my characters had flame magic. And it just felt a little bit confusing as what I was meant to do. Now, upon looking at a video, apparently in the initial release on the PC, you didn't even have any information, so you had to guess what you had to do at this point. But there were so many times where I just felt like I wasn't entirely sure what I had to do. And one of these was like a permanent injury or a permanent condition. And I didn't know where to look and what I was doing, and it didn't feel overly intuitive to find out. Combined with the fact that the controls are obviously PC based, I really felt that it didn't work for the controller trying to turn it to a pointer and use the R2 buttons to switch it around. Overall, I felt that this game was confusing, and that for me is a reason that people who are not overly invested in D&D and who are not heavy classic RPG fans, and I'm talking even heavier than somebody like Baldur's Gate, that this game may be something that's a little bit off-putting for some. One section that I did enjoy was the map. I enjoyed moving around the map because there were random encounters and new locations to discover, but it seemed to be so slow. Just the movement in general in this game was slow, and one thing that really annoyed me is that you couldn't speed up the movement of your people. And it was little quality of life things like this that made this game so difficult. The lack of information, the overall confusion of the controls, it just frustrated me. It didn't make it a bad game, but it made it a more difficult experience. Now let's move on to step 4, which is the audio and the visual. Visually, this game looks absolutely phenomenal. I really enjoyed the graphical style. It looks like Baldur's Gate, it plays like Baldur's Gate in the sense of the graphics, and the environments look absolutely superb, as do the enemies. I think the animations are okay, but all in all, it looked like a solid game. My favourite thing was the voice acting and the music. It felt like Skyrim. The music felt like something out of Skyrim, this epic classical theme. And I enjoyed the fact that the voiceover artists had been in there. It helped with the characterization, and yes, some of my party, I didn't even like them, I found them annoying, and that's something that was joyful about this, because again, it reminds you of that D&D experience. So that, for me, the visuals and the audio was a winner. So now let's move on to step 5, which is the summary and should you buy it. I really enjoyed it in a lot of ways, but I found it overly frustrating to get into and enjoy. I felt there was a lot of reading outside of the game that could have been really helped during the game, and I felt thrown in at the deep end. The freezing and the issues with the save game I can overlook because they can be fixed with patches, but some of these problems with the lack of information made the game difficult for the wrong reasons. Likewise, stumbling across an enemy who was way too hard just made it frustrating. I enjoyed it as the game progressed, but I felt to get there, once I'd got my little kingdom and I was developing, it got more interesting, there were new dynamics, but to get there, it took a lot of patience. And I think that's the overall issue for me. It's a great game, good story, nothing new, but the mechanics are interesting, and if you do want a challenge and you do want something that resembles a D&D game, then this is one to look at. But if you're looking for an easy play or something that's easily enjoyable and fun just to get into, then this might not be for you. Overall, I'm going to give this game a 7 out of 10. It's solid, it's interesting, but a little bit overcomplicated for its own good. I'm looking forward to the sequel because I kind of hope they can build from here. But for me now, I think I'm just going to return to Baldur's Gate and enjoy that. But on that note, this is Roy McCoy, out.